Hello, and welcome to the start of a very unexpected reading vlog. There were some anticipated release books that I was keeping my eye out, but I knew that I wasn't gonna buy a physical copy. These were books that I intended to get on the wait list for at my library and then also for my Libby. So usually when a book is released and I wake up in the morning and I remember to add myself to the Libby wait list, I end up waiting a long time because by then I'm usually like number 12 in line. But for the release of Thief, Liar, Lady, as well as the release of Ebony Gate, they both released today, and I remembered surprisingly for the first time ever to put myself on the wait list before it released, and they both hit my phone directly at midnight last night. And that was so unexpected because I knew that I was going to read them, but I didn't know that I was going to read them as soon as they dropped. So here we are at the start of a vlog in the middle of me also filming other vlogs because I bit off more than I could chew. But these are all books that I am very interested in, and I'm so ecstatic that, you know, just moving away from a rigid TBR and just doing like mood reads whenever the interests strike me has proved wondrously effective for my usual summer reading slump, and I don't want to do anything to upset that balance. And so while I'm in the mood to read these, and while I actually have an interest to read them, I'm going to read them. So I don't know what else is going to end up in this vlog, but just know that this vlog started because I got access to Ebony Gate and Thief, Liar, Lady, Thief, Lady, Liar, whatever the title is. You can see it right here. I got access to it much earlier than I expected. So there's that. Let's talk about Thief, Liar, Lady. I know that Cinderella retellings are not my thing. Most fairy tale retellings are not my thing, but sometimes my curiosity gets the best of me. About 2 years ago, a friend of mine gifted me Little Thieves, which is a retelling of Goose Girl. I was not initially familiar with the Goose Girl fairy tale, not in depth. Like I got the synopsis and like the spark notes of it. But when I read that book, I was pleasantly surprised at how much of an enjoyable read it was, especially for a YA. For me, if a book is a fairy tale retelling and it is YA, I usually be like, hell no, because I know that that is not going to be my cup of tea. But I ended up reading it because it was a gift, and I would have just really felt bad. Like my friend really wanted me to read it. I would have felt bad unhauling a book that they bought for me that they wanted me to read. Like that's just not the kind of person I am. But I read it and I think I give it like 4 stars. I'm not going to read the sequel because I think that it shouldn't have a sequel. And in my mind, it doesn't. So don't ask me about Painted Devils, not reading that. And so yeah, that was the first time in a few years that a retelling worked for me. And it opened the door for so many other types of retellings, but I still steered away from Cinderella retellings. So back to Thief, Liar, Lady. This is a Cinderella retelling where Cinderella is a scammerella, right? Where everybody, her stepmom and her evil sisters were all in on the plan to woo the king and to woo the prince, who's now the king in the story, falling in love with her. This book also includes some type of like love magic where she has him under a literal love spell so that he is more susceptible and inclined to see her as the light of his eye. I also saw that this book was for fans of Naomi Novik for like spinning silver. So I was like, okay, let's see. I want to see a little Scammerella moment. And almost immediately from starting the story, I did not vibe with the writing style. I was hoping to have an authorial voice that was more similar to Margaret Owens, I think that's her name, in Little Thieves. But it did not, that's not what this book is. The writing is, it's a lot stiffer, and similarly with Naomi Novik, I think that it's not necessarily the writing style, but it is a combination of the tone on page and the narrator who's doing the audiobook. And so with Naomi Novik, I read Spinning Silver, and the audiobook, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it just constantly reminded me of a tone of a story that I dislike. And it seemed to amplify those things in a way that if I read it myself, I was able to kind of like switch the settings a little bit in my mind to make the story more palatable to me. And I'm experiencing the same problem with this one where, again, it's just not my favorite writing tone, and the narrator is doing her best work to amplify it in a way that just grinds my gears. So I'm not really enjoying the audiobook. Now, this is more personal to me, so I'm not holding this against them. I just feel like maybe in some capacity, I probably would have preferred to do a hybrid read, so I'm not stuck with the narrator this entire time, knowing what I know about my preference. But also, this is not landing on the bullseye in a way that I also hoped it would. I'm currently like 20% within the story, and I have contemplated DNFing it several times. But let me just give you an overlay of the synopsis. And so we have Ashlyn, I think that's her name, child. If I'm wrong, sue me. So Ashlyn has conspired with her mother or her stepmother and her stepsisters to get the king to fall in love. And so she has played into this farce of this romantic tale of her being, you know, this mistreated underdog of a young girl who has been swept off to the palace to live, you know, this very romantic and fairy tale-esque life. And that is not necessarily the case, but she is allowing this to fester because it assists her in her modus operandi, her MO, which is to secure a future that is pleasant for her and her family. So they're all in on the scheme, and she is just really trying to make it to her wedding. But in this kingdom, there was a rebellion a few years ago, and the leader of that rebellion was in prison. One of the first things that she does is freeze him. This seems in contradiction to her primary goal, which is to marry the king and secure a profitable future for her sisters and her stepmother, because if the king is dealing with civil war, how is he supposed to, you know, it feels like she's putting her own bag at risk. Hold on, my camera's dying. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. But yeah, it feels like she's putting her own bag at risk. And so on her way from the dungeons, after freeing this rebel leader, she runs into this kind of like hostage prince. And her excuse for running around the castle in the middle of the damn night was that she is a sleepwalker. And so she sees this hostage prince, which, let me explain what that means. This kingdom also had a war conflict with a neighboring kingdom in which they won. And in the treaty, this neighboring kingdom that lost gave up their sovereignty. And the son, the youngest son, actually had to move to this kingdom. And so he is a kind of like prince consort, or he's like a ruler in waiting, but he's mostly just a hostage to make sure that this kingdom that lost stays in line. So you know from the synopsis that Ashlyn, if that is even her freaking name, it is really escaping me right now, but yeah, you know from the synopsis that they are gonna fall in love, and that her connection with him is going to put her plan at risk. And that is what I expected going into the story. I expected her love for this hostage prince to get in the way, and maybe she would somehow get caught up, you know, in trying to free his nation or pulling the wool over the king's eyes even further. I don't know. But her freeing this rebel leader threw me for a loop. Did it interest me any more into the story? Absolutely not. Like, I'm still impartial to what's happening here, but I still have enough curiosity to keep going. Is it waning? Absolutely. I don't know if my curiosity, dwindling as it is going to make it 80% more into the story. And that's the question of this vlog. Will my interests dwindle before the end of this audiobook? Let's find out. I gave Thief Liar Lady a good 30% of the book. And yeah, I could tell that this was already going to be a 2-star read, but right around the 30% mark, it started to feel like a 1.5 star read. And Monty actually, I guess, got an arc of this book, and so he ended up writing me and letting me know that he also gave the book 1.5 stars and that it did not get any better. And I decided it was time to jump first. It was time to choose myself. And I just have too many other books that I'm currently reading right now that are just so much more entertaining, that are so much better, to be honest. So that was a DNF. I also got the audiobook for The Splinter in the Sky, which is a book that I did pre-order. I just, while I was adding all the other books from my Libby, I decided to add the audiobook for this one as well. And that also came through today. So, you know, we're swapping one out for the other. We're stopping with the Flyer Lady and we're switching over to The Splinter in the Sky. Still plan on reading Ebony Gate. So whichever one I start first, I'll come back and let you guys know. I'm officially about 25% into The Splinter in the Sky, so I wanted to come and update you guys on my initial thoughts. The world building in this one, I am pleasantly surprised that I am able to keep up. I've mentioned on my channel plenty of times before that sometimes the world building in sci-fi novels is just beyond my level of visualization. It's really hard for me to picture things. And I also feel like as much as I hear people complain about fantasy authors trying so hard to come up with outrageous names and titles and just descriptions of things to try to make their world like fantastical, I feel like, you know, that is overdone in the sci-fi world. I feel the same way, I guess, when it comes down to me reading sci-fi. I feel like they just be doing the most with some of these descriptions and it'd be beyond my capacity. So our main character in this story is Anetin. I could be saying their name wrong, but we start off the story just really getting to know them. Their home is dealing with the aftermath of a failed war. They were recently conquered and Anetin is witnessing the historicization of her home and of her people right before her eyes. And they are in this phase where these quasi-Jesuits or like missionaries, very religious, have come to her home to try to domesticate her barbaric people. And so she is really just trying to keep her head down, trying to, you know, assimilate to this new functioning society and not trying to draw attention to herself. She's constantly warning her sibling to fall in line. Early on in the story, their sibling actually goes missing and Anetin really has no idea where they could possibly be and are really just scared for their safety. So they turn to their past lover, who is a person of relative power and like influence within this new empire that has conquered their home. And so they're like, they make this promise to Anetin that they're going to try to figure out where Anetin's sibling has gone. And almost immediately they are killed. And so now Anetin has lost her sibling as well as her lover. And she's starting to feel swallowed by this empire and really wholly helpless as to like how she can get revenge and find her sibling in the whole nine. And then on top of that, other people start dying around her. This rebellion kind of reaches out to her and asks her to spy for them because they're not really on board with the recent surrender by the emperor. So there's just a lot of like political nuance to the story. It has a lot of echoes of A Memory Called Empire and the sequel A Desolation Called Peace. It is very similar to that, but I have to say that it is just much more palatable. The writing is much more easy to digest. The world building to me, by comparison, especially to such a dense book, is one more in alignment with my preference. And I find myself really interested within the story. And so Anetin is, you know, thrust into the heart of the Valbarian Empire. And she is, one, on the hunt for where her sibling might be held, two, trying to figure out who would have been involved with the assassination of her closest friend and past lover, and also spying on behalf of this rebellion group, hoping that she may be able to free her conquered home in the meantime. So she has a lot of things riding on this like spying situation and all the things that she can pick up within the heart of the empire because she has like a lot of goals to go through. I don't necessarily trust her in a sense, or like I don't want to say trust, that's not the correct word. I don't necessarily have faith in her just yet. And that's not for any particular reason other than I feel like she just hasn't been presented in a way that invokes trust and faith, that she can handle this, right? This is a lot that she's trying to do, and she is timid in a lot of ways. She really just wanted to be like a tea person. She's really into tea. And so yeah, her world has just been flipped on its head, and I just am interested to see how she's going to navigate, how she's going to acclimate, and how successful she's going to be, because the author has not presented her in a way that either makes her naive and helpless and weak, where I'm just like, okay, I don't really know if she's going to be able to do this, but I also don't know her full strength and her capacity as well. So there's still some room there for building up her character arc. And I also think that that is going to come in time after I see how she continues to navigate situations that really throw her for a loop, because she has been very nonplussed with everything that's been happening, where she is entirely lost and confused and literally does not know how to react and how to move forward. So I'm hoping that throughout the process of the story, she learns to get quicker on her feet. She learns to stop being so reactionary and actually tries to develop a plan, but we literally just don't have enough information. We don't know enough, and we don't have enough connections or resources or any place to find those connections or resources just yet. So yeah, we are navigating this empire blindly with Anitin, and I'm very, very invested. I'm very interested, and that's surprising to me because I usually don't like stories like this. Comparing this book and its writing to Jemisin and Okorafor, I have to say I wholeheartedly agree with, because it is very similar, except in a sci-fi setting, to what I've read from N.K. Jemisin before, and so I'm excited. I say that very cautiously, but I am excited to see where this book is going to go. There's more focus on the structure of the society and how Anitin's people is viewed as barbaric, and how by comparison they aren't as savage as people a part of the Valbarian Empire think them to be, and watching people almost like either appropriate her culture, reminisce about her culture as if it doesn't really exist anymore when it still absolutely does, and just treating her culture as something that is, you know, beneath them. It's all very interesting to see how she interacts with individuals and how they view her and what assumptions they make about her just because of her home and her heritage, and also how many of those things are not true. I think most of what I'm learning about her is in contrast to how she's viewed in the society. And I think that's a really cool way to build structure and to build, you know, complex details around a character by just putting them in stark contrast to a bunch of assumptions made about them. My goal today is to read more than half of it, and it's only like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I feel like I'm going to be rather successful in this. And so yeah, I'll be back with further updates. I have officially finished The Splinter in the Sky, and I think I'm going to settle on 3 stars for this. It was just interesting enough for me to not DNF the story. Ultimately, I think this book hit a lot of the same thematic notes and told the same messages as A Memory Called Empire, almost in the same way, without adding anything really worthy to the conversation other than what is already like out there in the world, in the field. And so I wanted to see, I guess, a more refreshing take. I wanted a more revitalized, passionate message, and it was okay. Like, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't exceptional by any means. And so I think I'm going to settle on 3 stars for this one. In a lot of ways, I feel like this book is going to be forgettable to me, and a lot of the details will start to escape me the further that I get away from this book. And then ultimately, I feel like there's not going to be any distinguishing details about this book in particular that's going to stick with me, because it just failed to distinguish itself, really. But I enjoyed it while I was reading it. There is gender non-binary representation within the story. There is a romance between Anitin and like this empress of this world, and that didn't necessarily compete with the plot, because their relationship dynamic and the progression of their relationship depends on the plot itself. Like, the plot is intricately tied into their relationship, and so for me, I wasn't really invested in their relationship. And so I didn't really get a break from it, because it was either we were in their relationship, or we were seeing their relationship be put to the test, or we were seeing their loyalties of the relationship be put to the test. There wasn't really any aspect of the book that felt removed from this relationship except for Anitin's relationship with their gender non-binary sibling. So yeah, it's okay. I feel like I'm trying to just go hard for the book, but it was a 3-star read, and that's not bad. That's not a failure. We're moving into Ebony Gate next, and hopefully I finally get a good one out of this vlog, because so far of the new releases, we have 1 DNF and 1 3-star read. So we're trending upward, right? Because I actually finished this one and I didn't rate it less than 3 stars, so that's great. But can we do a little better is the question. I am now about 40% into Ebony Gate, and I finally feel a sense of comfortability with the story and feel like I'm able to come and share my thoughts with you guys. The beginning of this book was very rough for me to get into personally, because there is a heavy-handed amount of fantasy set in a modern world. Our main character lives in San Francisco, and she is very like Ninth House style. Actually, the story is eerily similar to Ninth House in terms of like the layout of the world and how we have a main character that is balancing fighting beasts, monsters, creatures, whatever. And she is a family member to a very powerful clan, and there's a lot of eccentricities to them, but she deals with a lot of reality and then not so much reality, like different worlds and things like that. So we start off the story with her. She is pretty much a badass. She's a very good fighter. She is known as the Butcher. She was I think it's called the Blade of her family, but then something happened to where she lost her ability to have a talent or to have like a magical ability, and she was disgraced by her family. So Emiko moved away, and she has rebuilt another life in San Francisco, and it's really hard for her again to balance the expectations of her family, because while she's no longer the Blade, she is still very valuable to the family, just not in a way that they give her a title for it. They use her, but she's not really accepted into the family. I don't know. It's just a very delicate situation between her and her family. But her mother ends up trading a relic, kind of like a blood relic, with the god of death. And so now Emiko is bound by honor to find this relic called the Ebony Gate, which essentially opens a portal to the dead world. And if she doesn't do it anytime soon, then she will have to trade her soul in place of the Ebony Gate to hold back these dead spirits. So basically she's been indebted to the god of death through her mother. Again, it's really hard to explain, but I promise the book makes better sense of what I'm trying to tell you than what I'm trying to tell you. So Emiko, on top of the fact that she is honor bound to answer this call from the god of death, she's also feeling very obligated to protect her city, because if she doesn't, everything that she has attempted to set up in San Francisco to have some semblance of a normal life is going to be at risk, because it will be her city that is flooded with these dead monstrous spirits. There's nothing particularly wrong with the story itself, but in the beginning, all the signs were pointing to me that this wasn't going to be a story that I typically enjoyed, because again, it was heavy-handed on the fantasy, and I usually have a really hard time when we have an urban setting with too many fantastical components to it. Like Jade City to me is the perfect balance, because the magic in Jade City is something that you can understand on a rational and almost scientific level. But this one made me feel similarly to what I did when I read The City We Became. N.K. Jemisin is such a phenomenal fantasy writer, and I just felt that the New York setting, an urban New York setting, was constantly at war with these heavy fantasy aspects that she was attempting to add into the story. And the beginning of this book felt very much like that. The authors are doing a very good job of fleshing things out, rounding out some of the rough edges, and even though I'm still cautious and tentative about the story, I am enjoying it enough to keep going, and they are slowly starting to break down my walls the more comfortable that I get within the story. It doesn't feel like it's at war, but it's still pretty much on the precipice where, as we start to really find this relic or this Ebony Gate and these dead spirits start to wander around San Francisco, it can get very crazy very fast, because this is past like a paranormal romance. This is wholly into like a fantasy genre, and just again, urban fantasy just sometimes does not work with your girl. There's another character within the story that has another relic that Amiko needs to steal, and there is a slight romantic attraction to him. He's very curious about her connection to ancient artifacts, and how much she knows and how much influence she has, because she knows everyone she needs to know, but she stays under wraps, so she's not as known, even though she knows people, if that makes sense. And so he's questioning a lot of things about her past. She is slightly attracted to him, but she doesn't want to get involved in him because she has too much stuff going on. Like, she's literally trying to steal an ancient artifact for a death god, and as soon as she's done with that, she needs to steal another artifact from him. So, you know, my girl has a long to-do list. Part of me feels as though he is not as in the dark about who she is and her family as he is portraying himself to be. Maybe that will be the plot twist. Who knows? I can't spoil it for you because I'm just postulating. I'm just guessing right now. But something about him makes me feel like he could be a villain in disguise. Like, he's pretending to not know anything about her and pretending to be a bit of a damsel in distress, to where she feels obligated to really go and save him and to reveal more about herself than she initially intended. Or that could just be the way that these authors are rolling out the romance within the story. I'm not sure which one is true, but these are my two guesses so far. Right now it's trending to be at least a 3.5, at least minimum. That seems to be the lowest rating I'm going to give it so far, is about 3.5 stars. But I still have a good 60% of the story to get through. And so who knows? I could change my mind. So I ended up finishing Ebony Gate about 3 days ago. And it took me a while to come to terms with my perceptions and like my thoughts on the book in a way that I feel like I could sit down and update you guys. And I still don't feel like I'm really there. I think that I liked the concept more than I liked the execution. Not that there was anything wrong with the execution. I do think that the book does what it sets out to do. I just was not that interested. Like, it was one of those books where if I wasn't listening to it or wasn't physically reading it at the moment, it wasn't on my mind. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't interested or really excited to go back to the story. But once I got back into the story, I didn't have any complaints. So I just had to get over the initial hump of jumping back into the story, because it's not one that I found myself to be like really attached to. But I didn't have any complaints while I was listening to it, and so settling on 3 stars for this one as well. I'm really glad that I have a deep and healthy understanding of my reading taste, because I feel like all 3 of these books that we've attempted to read in this vlog, The Flyer Lady, The Splinter in the Sky, and Ebony Gate, I feel like I liked them all conceptually, but it wasn't enough for me to say, okay, let me go to the store and grab a physical copy or pay physical money for the ebook or audio, whatever. There was just something about the books that was interesting enough for me to check them out, but not enough for me to like purchase them on my own. I think that just ties into like my confidence and my faith in understanding what type of books I should take a leap of faith and invest in prior. In the last 2 years, I've gotten to the point where I've wanted to stop purchasing books that just because I was interested in them, like leaning more on my Libby Scrib library so that it's not costing me as much money, so that I wasn't unhauling or disliking so many books. So I feel really proud that I am at the point where I can see a book that sounds interesting, but it doesn't really sound like a new favorite, or I'm still running like a risky purchase and decide to say, hey, let me wait on that from my library and then purchase it and add it to my collection afterhand if I end up liking the story. If you have made it to the end of this video, leave me a sword down in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next one.